Okay, so today's video will be on finding the rule using tables. Our learning goals for today: by the end of the lesson you'll be able to find the rule of a linear equation from a table of given values, and you'll also be able to find the rule from a graph by first constructing a table of x, y values. Okay, so some key ideas for you here. So a rule must be true for every pair of coordinates, remember coordinates are those x, y points, in a table or a graph. So the linear rule is in the form of y equals something times x plus something. So this box here that I've done for our unknown, the something times x, is called the coefficient. So this is the coefficient. So the coefficient of x will be the increase in y as x increases by 1. So if y decreases as x increases, it'll be a negative number. And the second box that I've got here, so the plus something, this is the constant. So the constant is the value of y when x equals 0. So another way we can write this formula equals y equals mx plus c. M is that coefficient, so that's that change in y as x increases by 1, coefficient, and c is that constant, which is the value of y when x equals 0. Okay, so for example, we've got two tables here. So we know that formula y equals mx plus c. So m is that coefficient of x. So it's the change in y as x increases by 1. So in our first table, we can see x is increasing by 1. So -2, -1, 0, 1, 2. It's increasing by 1. So we're going to look down here at the y. How does y change as x increases by 1? So -1 to 1. What is that an increase of? That's an increase of 2. 1 to 3, that's an increase of 2. 3 to 5, it's increased by 2. 5 to 7 is an increase of 2. So it's changing by 2 every time that that x changes by 1. So x goes up by 1. Here, it's going up by 1, plus 1, plus 1, plus 1. What's happening to y? Well, to get here, y is going up by 2. You can see it's an increase of plus 2 each time. We're adding 2 on to get to our y. So we'll know m is 2 because that's that change in y as x increases. So mx plus c, and c is our constant, and that's our value of y when x equals 0. So when x equals 0, what does y equal? Equals 3. So that would be our rule for this. Y equals 2x plus 3. So for our second one, we know it's going to follow that formula y equals mx plus c because it's a linear relation. M is that change in y as x increases by 1. You can see here x is increasing by 1. So we've added 1 each time. So plus 1, plus 1. How is y changing? So to get from 1 to 0, what do we have to do? We have to take 1. 0 to -1, take 1. -1 to -2, take 1. -2 to -2. Well, that's not actually changing. That should be -3. Take 1. So that should be a change in y. So that change in y, it's decreasing by 1. Sorry, that was a typo here. That should say -3. So it's changing. It's -1. It's decreasing every time. It's taking 1. So it's -1 x plus c. And remember, c is the value of y when x equals 0. So x equals 0 here, y equals -1. So our formula would be y equals -1x plus -1. That would be our formula. Or if we wanted to rewrite that, we could just do y equals -x, take 1. That would probably be a better way of writing that one. Okay, so if the value of y when x equals 0 is not given in the table, what we do is we substitute another pair of coordinates into the formula to find the value of the constant. So for instance, we've got to find out what our formula is. So we know that y equals mx plus c. We need to find out the m and the c. So m is that coefficient of x, so the coefficient of x is m, and that's that increase or decrease in y as x increases by 1. So according to our table, we can see x is increasing by 1. To get to the next one, we're always adding 1. So to find m, we need to find the corresponding change in y. So what is y doing? To go from 5 to 7, are we increasing or decreasing? So we're going to have a positive or a negative number. Well, it's increasing, we're adding, so it's going to be a positive number. And 5 to 7 is adding 2. 7 to 9, adding 2. 9 to 11, adding 2. So we know our m value is going to be a positive 2. So 2x plus c. So c is that constant when y equals 0. So if we're not sure what c is, because we're not given an x equals 0 value on the table, we're just going to substitute in another pair of coordinates to find the value. So what does that mean? Well, we know our formula is y equals 2x plus c. So we need to find out what c is. And we can actually substitute in values for y and x according to this table. So for instance, we could substitute in these two values. So in that instance, y will equal 5. So 5 equals 2 times x, and x was 2, plus c. So 5 equals 2 times 2, which is 4, plus c, and we can solve for c. So to work out what c is, we obviously have to take 4 from both sides. 5 take 4 is 1. 4 take 4 is 0, so c equals 1. So then we can substitute that value back in. So we know our formula will be 2x plus c, and we just worked out our c is 1. Our constant is 1. So y equals 2x plus 1. We've got that from our table, even though we don't have a x equals 0 value. Instead, we just substituted in another pair of coordinates and solved for c. Okay, so some worked examples here. Find the rule for these tables. So let's start with A. So these are linear tables. It should say that in the question, but it doesn't, so I'm just going to tell you now. We know they're linear tables, so we know they're going to follow that rule. Y equals mx plus c. And m is that coefficient of x. It's the change in y as x increases by 1. And c is the value of y when x equals 0. So we look at our table. X is increasing by 1. So what is y doing as it changes? So y is going from -8 to -5. From -5 to -2, -2 to 1, 1 to 4. So it's obviously increasing. So we know m is going to be a positive number. So y equals some positive value of m. So how much is it increasing each time? Well, to go from -8 to -5, it's increasing. It's going more towards the positive end of our number line. So what is it increasing by? What do you have to add to -8 to get to -5? It's increasing by 3. From -5 to -2, we're adding 3 each time. So we know our m value will be 3. So it'll be 3x plus c. And c is our value of y when x equals 0. So x equals 0 here. What does y equal? -2 plus -2. We know when we're adding, a negative is the same as taking away. So we'd rewrite our rule as y equals 3x take 2. And that would be our rule for A. For B, we're going to do the same thing. We know it's going to fit this formula, y equals mx plus c. We look, actually I might clear this so we've got a bit more space because B is a bit more involved. So look for B. So y equals mx plus c. We're looking here at our table. Again, we can see that x is increasing by 1 each time. So we're going to look at the corresponding change in y. What is it doing? So it's going from -5 to -7, -7 to -9, -9 to -11, -11 to -13. So y is actually decreasing. So that means our m value will be a negative number. So how much is it decreasing by each time? Well, to get from -5 to -7, we're taking 2. So each time we're taking 2 off our value. So that means our m value will be that -2, that take 2. So it'll be -2x plus c, and c is our value of y when x equals 0. But in our table, we do not have an x equals 0. So we're going to choose a set of coordinates. I just like picking the first ones just because they're usually the easiest. We're going to substitute those in to work out our value for c. Okay, so y in this case, so I'll just write 3, -5. And we're going to substitute those in to find c. So y in this case equals -5 equals -2 times x, and x is 3 plus c. So -5 equals -2 times 3. So a negative times a positive is a negative. 2 times 3 is 6 plus c. So -5 equals -6 plus c. So we need to find our value of c. So we're going to do the inverse operation. So the opposite of -6 is adding 6, because that will give us 0. So -5 plus 6 will give us 1. -6 plus 6 will give us 0. So 0 plus c is just c. So c equals 1. Then we can substitute that back into our original formula. So sub into formula, c equals 1. So y equals mx, and we know m is negative 2, x plus c, which we know is 1. So that would be our formula. Y equals negative 2x plus 1. That's our formula there for b. Okay, so our last worked example is about finding the rule from a graph. So if you have a graph, just like this one here, we've got our linear relation plotted on our Cartesian plane here, but we don't know the rule. So what we have to do is first construct a table of values. So remember, that's our x and y. And the table of values is actually going to be kind of already given because we've got the points plotted here. So we'll start with our smallest x value. So our first point is negative 1, negative 3. So x is negative 1, y is negative 3. That's our first lot. Our second one is here, which is this point. So that's here. So x is 0, y is negative 2. Our third one is here, that's this point. So x is 1, y is negative 1. Next one is here, x is 2, y is 0. And last is this point here, where x is 3 and y is 1. So we've gone from our graph to our table of values, and from there we can use that table of values to work out the rule. So we know our rule is going to follow that given formula because we've got a straight line. So it's obviously a linear relationship because it's a straight line. So we know the formula is going to be y equals mx plus c. M is that change in y as x increases by 1. If we look at our table, yes, x is increasing increasing by 1 each time. So what's happening to y? So it's going from negative 3 to negative 2 to negative 1 to 0 to 1. So it's increasing. How much is it increasing by? 1. So it's just plus 1. So m is going to equal plus 1. So y equals 1 x plus c. And remember, c is the value of y when x equals 0. So x equals 0 here, y equals negative 2 plus negative 2. So we're just going to rewrite that rule so it follows convention, because we don't write 1x, we just write x. And we don't write plus and negative, we just write take. So y equals x, take 2. That would be our rule. So our answer, y equals x, take 2. And we could label our graph here as well. So y equals x, take 2. That would be the answer there. So that's the end of this video. You've learnt how to find the rule from a table and how to find the rule from a graph. Make sure you're familiar with both of those things. Make sure you have written down the notes at the start of the video about what m is, what c equals, and make sure you remember that relates to linear relationships. And as usual, any questions, make sure you come and see me in class.